Hello and welcome back to another daily cribbage. We are against the square peg. Let's see if we can get something going here. We got a 5 with a couple of 10s, but we also have a run, so let's keep the run. We'll throw away 9 queen and get an 8 on top. So jump up to 18. If our opponent has a 10, then we would go to 31. 9 also lets us go to 31. When it has double 6 left over, makes total sense, and we'll give them a few points there. So 13 points as the dealer, a little bit under average. Opponent gets 10 points as pawn, which is completely average. So we've got 6, 7, 8. Let's keep it with a 2. We have to split up our 2, 3, but that is the case sometimes. We'll lead us 7. I think 8's also a fine lead. Come up to 23, which gives us space to get 1 for the last card here when our opponent plays their 5. That's a little bit of a risky play, especially if your opponent has 5 combos that involve 2s and 3s, maybe sometimes 2, 3 ace. It could end up costing you a lot of points there. But we dodge it and we get a double run. We have to throw away ace king, which is a little sad, but let's see if we can fake some flushes. Opponent has double 3, allows us to jump up and offload our jack. Opponent has triple 3. Okay, triple 3, 4. There's 6 points this time, but sometimes that does hit a 2 or a 5, so did dodge a few points there. We're 11 points behind our milestone. But, hey, just as I say that, we get a chance to get there. Let's start with a 10. As our opponent wanted to do, make it 14. Hate to do this, but we'll jump up to 24. Do they have a 5? No, they don't have a 5. It's a good thing for them. We do make 44 because we got one point for the last card. But our opponent storms ahead into the lead, in terms of points at least, because of all of those points from the double run and the crib. Double 10, it's not too exciting, but we do keep a lot of cards in hand that can combo. I don't want to play a 6 here or a 2. I'm just going to take these 2 points, but I'm not happy about it. I refuse to be happy about it. Yes, opponent definitely has a lot of 6s there, but it's okay. So we get a few points back from that 9, make 15. So one of the things that we were I tried to avoid playing out the 2, because once you see the 4 and the 9, you start to get the thinking the opponent might have a 2 themselves. So it'd be nice to pair it. I'm thinking 3 queen here, keep the 5 points. It's not the safest discard, but what are you going to do about it in this case? Wow, that is bold. Opponent must have an extremely polarized hand. What was this? 5, 5, 6? 4? Okay. Guess our opponent didn't want to play out their 4 because of our 5s and wasn't too afraid of our 4s because they had one. I don't know about that from our opponent. We'll go back and analyze that later. Let's continue with all these 10s and the 5. Seems pretty nice. I'm going to be very happy to lead our jack here, I think. The only way that leading the jack there doesn't work out is if opponent has an ace, but they don't have an ace there. Okay, opponent has 10 points there with the 9 on top. It's pretty good. And just a couple of points in the crib for us, pair of 9s. We're at 80, our opponent's an 85. We're a little behind now. And I think it's time to either throw away, well, I think we just throw away the 2 queen here. And probably lead a 6. come up to 25. If our opponent has 5, then we get to make it 31. We've played out our magic 16. And, okay, opponent didn't want to play an 8 there for some reason. Felt like that would have been what I would have done. Okay, opponent does make the milestone at 96. They actually get to 100. Look down at a flush, but we'd much rather keep the longer run. Don't like our position. We are quite far behind, and we're not looking at a hand that improves often enough to a high enough score in order to pose much of a problem to our opponent, who is gonna probably just very casually get to probably has more 10s than kings here, very slightly. There we go, works out for us, but opponent does have a strong hand here. Thankfully not a flush, but we need a bit of a miracle to come back. Is this a miracle? No. No, this is just 7, 8, 9. I guess we keep the 2, because when we cut a 6, it gives us an extra 2 points. Okay. We'll start with a 2. See if our opponent plays a 6. They play an 8. We will pair that. If our opponent has another 8 here, we're kind of doomed. 8 king from our opponent. Okay, well this could be a good sign. King, queen, jack. Okay, so only 4 points in our opponent's hand. We know they've got 2 points in the crib, so we're pretty much dead. We will say good game and have a little look at the details. We got a few points on the play, but we missed out a few in the hand and the crib. Let's go back for a sec. This is the sort of insane play that I wanted to go back to. We are at 59 points. Opponent's also at 59 points, all square. But nothing's ever square when the points are level in cribbage. It's all about the position. In this case, we are both 11 points away from our next milestone. And that means that as pawn here, we need to get a little bit lucky, because we're looking at a hand that's 6, 9, 10 jack, which is only 5 points, and the cut didn't help us. It's an ace, so we remain at 5 points. And we have one of the wrong jacks. So the thing that makes this play sort of insane is that we lead our 6, which I think is one of the standard things to lead here. Definitely can lead a 9 as well, or 10. I don't think leading the jack that often is good, but I tend to very rarely lead jacks. Might be something I need to look into. But our opponent, after we play our 6, plays a 5. And by playing the 5, our opponent basically is saying, you don't have a 4. Because our opponent thought we'd have a 4 here. We're going to be playing that 4 and getting 5 points. 3 for the run, 2 for 15. Taking us up to 64 points, putting us only 7 points away from our positional milestone. And in return, well, what could our opponent want after that? Well, opponent's the dealer, which means that in terms of position, they are in a bad one, right? Let's say our opponent has an extremely strong hand. Let's say that they have the hand that they had in the game, so which is something that involves 4, 5s, and 6s. So something that's worth, in this case, around 12 points. Let's put them on a 12-point hand like that. And that means that once we get to scoring, let's assume that we don't make it to 70 points. Our opponent's going to be getting over 70 points as the dealer. So they're in the situation that if we transpose the scores up by, multiples of 26, as you would do, if you want to test out what position you're in, well, that means that in 2 rounds, if we add 26 to the scores, we're going to be coming up to 96. And then if we add on another 26 again, then we are trying to close out the game at that point. So our opponent wants to close out the game in around 4 rounds as the dealer, whereas we are looking to, well, if we had got lucky here, close out the game in 4 rounds as pawn, so we're getting there slightly earlier. Unfortunately, our hand doesn't let that happen. But if our opponent scores a bit more here, they're still going to be slightly behind our position. So by giving us extra points, our opponent's saying, well, I can put myself maybe in a position where I'm going to go out a round sooner. But what does that mean? Well, 12 points doesn't change the positional aspect too much. Maybe if our opponent knows that their crib's going to be really good, our opponent needs to get, in order to get to the next milestone ahead of schedule, they need to make up this 11-point difference, i.e. they just need to get a free 11 points from somewhere. So maybe over the course of 2 rounds, instead of scoring 26, they score 37. Well, that's a tall task. That doesn't happen. Well, that does happen because of positive skew. When you score big, when you score above average, you do score quite big. But it's very hard to see how the ace is really going to combo with any of your hands, especially once you've led a 5. The other thing is that, maybe our opponent suspects that we don't have 4s here, and that could be because they have a lot of 4s. If you had a hand that was 5 triple 4, you might play your 5 here defensively, because if you play your 4, then it's more likely for your opponent to have a 5 than a 4 after a 6 lead. So opponent plays out a 5 as a defensive option. But actually what I think is going on here is our opponent's playing this 5 offensively. They're saying that if we play a 4, then they're going to get more points. They're going to get into a position where they're going to actually be getting close to getting 37 points over the course of 2 rounds. Which is hard to believe, especially with the variance of the crib. You can never guarantee such a thing. And also the variance of how many points you get as pawn on the next round. The other thing our opponent could be saying is that we just don't have a 4, because whenever you lead a 6, maybe you just don't have a 4. And maybe that's true, especially if you look down at a hand that's maybe our opponent has 6 double 5 4. That would be one of the hands we might put our opponent on. And in that case, you could actually make a very reasonable claim that your opponent doesn't have a 4. And it's not because your opponent's led a 6. It's mostly because your 5s are blocking your opponent's... well, let's rewind for a second. I've started by leading a 6. And we have to, and our opponent is asking us, asking the question, do we have a 4 here? And our opponent looks down at their hand, looks down and sees maybe they've got lots of 5s and 4s themselves, and say, well, they definitely don't have this particular 4 that they have in hand, but what about the other 4s? And they might say, well, our opponent's led a 6, and if our opponent has a hand which has, I don't know, say 6 5 4 in it, there's a chance our opponent starts by leading the 4. And maybe that's a good sign that they don't have a 4 because they led a 6 instead of a 4. But this is an argument that I don't think is particularly strong, especially the way I play, because I tend to mix my leads a little bit. So if I have a hand with 6 5 4, then I will lead 6s and 4s some of the time. So by leading a 6, it's not conclusive that I don't have a 4. But if you look down at, our opponent looks down at their hand and notices that they've got a whole bunch of 5s, then it makes it a lot less likely that I have a hand which is 6 5 4. And if I don't have a hand which is 6 5 4, we have to ask the question, what hand does my opponent has that has 6s and 4s that prefers to lead 6 over 4? And I think the answer to that is not many hands. And therein lies the, I don't know, the genius to my opponent's play here by playing the 5. Now, this could backfire a little bit for our opponent still, because we could very easily have a hand that has 7s here. And we could still get 3 points by playing a 7, and if our opponent wants to increase the length of the run in the other direction and they have a 4, then that would make the total, well, we play the 7, make the total 18. Our opponent could play a 4, get 4 points for the run, make the total 22. And if we had an 8, which is fairly likely if we've played 6, 7, then we could be scoring a 5-point run, and we probably get 1 point for the go because we've made the total, what would that be, 29, no, we've made the total 30. So opponent would need an ace to get the 31. So that would be one way in which this would be sort of a complete disaster for our opponent. And if our hand is something like 6, 7, 8, the ace cut is quite good for us. We're looking at least 7 points there, and our opponent's really handing us an extra at least 3 points for this run that they're giving us. So that's the real question here is, did our opponent consider this? I assume not. We're playing quite a quick game, so I don't think our opponent was really thinking about those particular hands, or if they were, they're saying that I don't lead the 6 enough from those kinds of hands, which might be true, to be fair. I don't think I lead 6 from 6, 7, 8 often enough. That is maybe a slight gap in my game. But on the other hand, this would be a way to sort of exploit strategies that aren't balanced enough, because you can definitely play your 5s on a 6, I think, against quite a lot of opponents, as it turns out. But if you balance your strategy carefully, then you can make it so that your opponent really doesn't want to make this kind of play. I think our opponent should be, if they are looking at a hand which is 6, double 5, 4 here, our opponent should be reluctantly pairing the 6. So they would get 2 points, but they should be very open to the idea that we have another 6 in hand and we're going to triple it. But maybe our opponent is so scared of this because they know that this gives us 6 points, taking us up to 65 and potentially putting us into a great position in terms of milestones. They really wanted to avoid this. So they tried to make a slightly higher variance play, which could be safe against a lot of opponents, against the general population, say. But by doing that, they've opened themselves up to sort of losing a lot of tempo, losing a lot of position against hands that have 6, 7, 8 in them, which are already doing okay here. But maybe our opponent could try and go, well, if our hand is 6, 6, 7, 8, then our opponent isn't doing very well against that particular hand. So maybe it's okay to pair the 6 and know that if we had 6, 6, 7, 8, then they weren't doing very well and they didn't have much of an incentive to play the 5 instead of the 6. Okay, so I think we've gone quite in depth into this hand, and I hope you enjoyed that analysis. I will be back next time for another daily cribbage. Bye for now.